Okay, now we're going.
1, 2, 3, testing.
Perfect.
Good. Well, hello everybody. I'm Daniel the Healer, and I have a very interesting guest with me today, Dr. Sally Schutz, or as she likes to be called, Dr. Sally. Hello, Dr. Sally. How are you?
Well, Daniel the Healer, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. It's always good to have you.
Yes, well, you're a wealth of information and I've got plenty to share, so let's see what we can explore.
All right, all right. So, I'm always into healing. I'm always into looking at what ultimately helps people. And then when you and I recently talked, you talked to me about what you've researched, and I felt really exciting. And this is not just a quick fix, but it's something that will help you uh, gradually and obtain better and better health, able to look at old age in a better light. And so, Sally, please talk to me about your recent research you did and how you got into it. And, well, let's first start with actually who you are. Talk to me a little bit about your background.
I come from a medical family. My father was an ophthalmic surgeon. My brother, my two first cousins, I followed in their footsteps. I graduated from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, did a master's degree in psychopharmacology, and then went on to ophthalmic surgery, which I did until 1994 when I was in a life-threatening car accident. Following that time, when I recovered from the accident, I started to go into alternative health care when I got smacked with a diagnosis of chronic Lyme disease. So I've spent the last 14 years climbing out of that hole of chronic Lyme disease, and now that I'm well, I want to share lots of things that I've learned along that path. Some of them are traditionally oriented, and much of what I do, like you do, Daniel, is alternative or complementary or holistic.
Yes, yes, that's fantastic. I'm sorry to hear about your 14 years of Warble, but hey, live and learn.
Live and learn makes you stronger and makes you have something more important to talk about and share.
Yes, indeed. So, what is it that you then recently discovered that you're so eager to share?
Well, actually, it wasn't so much even recently. In 1981, I was practicing ophthalmology, and we would have patients with glaucoma, which is a form of high pressure in the eye. And these patients didn't respond to the glaucoma pharmaceutical eye drops that we had. And we actually, at that time, applied to, I think it was the I don't know if it was, I think it was the FDA at that time, and got permission to prescribe marijuana to these elderly patients to reduce their eye pressure. Well, in fact, it worked quite well, except many of them were indeed elderly and unsteady, with trouble with gait. And I often thought to myself it would be so wonderful to have a marijuana like compound that didn't have the psychoactivity that wouldn't adversely affect these elderly patients. But then I was in a car accident, and I was taken out of my ophthalmic practice. And then, most recently, when I was in recovery mode, I attended a lecture on CBD oil, hemp derived CBD oil, and it was like a major aha. That was what I was looking for over 30 years ago. A marijuana like compound which didn't have any psychoactivity. And I thought, wow, how come we haven't been hearing about this? I want to learn more. And so actually I did. I studied it quite a bit. I wrote a book, The Anti-Aging Miracles of Hemp-Derived CBD Oil. And my life partner and I said, this is the future because it's such an amazing plant. It's such an amazing compound that we actually formulated a product which we brought to market as Best Can CBD oil.
Oh, well, that's phenomenal. Now, a already got used here in the last few moments. You talked about the marijuana plant. You talked about hemp plant. What's the difference between the two?
That's a basic question. Thanks for asking, Daniel. They both come from cannabis sativa, which is one of the more common cannabis compounds, so they're cousins. But marijuana has to have greater than 0.3% THC to be marijuana, and hemp has to have less than 0.3% THC in order to be non-psychoactive and classified as hemp. Um, Most hemp is grown outdoors, under the sun, in huge fields, preferably organic. And so it's not a drain on electricity. It requires very little water, whereas marijuana is typically grown in greenhouses where there's demands on energy and water, and it's not as considered as sustainable as plants grown out in fields.
Yeah, and I heard also that hemp has many other uses. They make clothes, they make rope, they can make paper out of it. It's like this endless plant that they can make plastic out of it too. This
Yes.
plant that endlessly, and it's also very good on the environment because 1 acre of hemp can produce 3 times as much pulp as same acre of trees. So it's really interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
you're absolutely right, and it's a travesty because it was taken away from us in the last century. And at the end of the 1930s, the DuPonts were introducing synthetic fibers, so they didn't want any competition from this fantastic plant hemp that had fibers that were used for parachutes and ropes. And then Randolph Hearst didn't want any competition for his paper and forestry commercial endeavors. So they banished hemp as a agricultural product here in the United States. And then the pharmaceutical companies saw the handwriting on the wall that this was just an amazing healing had so many healing properties. So whereas in the United States in the 30s it was the most common remedy in the United States, there were tinctures by all the prominent pharmaceutical companies, Merck and Park Davis and all of them. And they actually, I guess it was Ansflanger acting as head of an FDA-like organization that classified hemp in the same category as marijuana and thus took it out of public use.
well, I'm glad it's coming back. So, hemp-derived CBD oil, that's another big thing. So, what is the difference then between, hemp oil and hemp-derived CBD oil?
Hemp-derived CBD oil is taken from the whole plant, all the aerial parts, the stem, the leaves, everything above the ground, whereas hemp oil comes from the seeds. So hemp oil is actually a wonderful food product. It's high in protein, it's high in omega-3s, it's got sterols, but it doesn't have a lot of the organic compounds known as cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are cannabis-like compounds that we're finding in nature, that we actually make ourselves in our own body, and actually now the pharmaceutical industries are very keen to isolate cannabinoids and bring them to market as well.
Isn't this funny? We make this in our own systems?
Yes, that's just extraordinary. So it was known in the last half of the last century that the body had receptors for cannabis-like compounds. And then it wasn't until 1992 that an Israeli named Raphael Meshulam discovered that we make our own cannabis-like compounds, and there were two primarily identified. And these compounds are amazing because they occur in breast milk. They are what calms the baby when it suckles at the mother's breast, and allows for bonding and tranquility. And it's found throughout the body in all the important areas, in the brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala, the cerebral cortex, all the major brain areas, and then as well in the immune system, the spleen, the gut, the liver, the kidneys, the bones, all the major areas. So this system, the cannabis-like receptors and the cannabis-like compounds that we make ourselves are actually have a fancy name called the endo, meaning within or inner, cannabinoid system, endocannabinoid system. So we have an endocannabinoid system. It is so important that it's been termed the master control system because it balances all the other systems in the body. And that balancing system is super important, of course, to homeostasis. Homeostasis means balance, and to good health.
Whoa, what a trip. I really like to hear that. So, how does one then, well, first of all, what does the body naturally do with this endocannabinoid system? And obviously, we're coming into this because the hemp-derived CBD oil, does that support it? Does that help out? What are the usage for Joe Blow on the street?
Right. Well, first of all, there are some people who don't make enough cannabinoids, and then there are other people, and those are, you mostly hear about that like children with seizures. They have an endocannabinoid system that isn't functioning well. So a lot of people have heard about the children who are taking who were taking a high level of cannabinoids in marijuana to control their seizures quite successfully. But for most people with a normal responding endocannabinoid system, and you have to understand that this science is really in its infancy. It's only been around for 1992, a little under, is that 25 years?
Yeah.
So it's still in its infancy. But what happens as the research is coming out is that the toxins in our environment affect the endocannabinoid system. It doesn't work as well, and that's why we're finding that replenishing it with external phytocannabinoids, cannabinoids that come from plants, is such an important supplement. The pharmaceutical companies as well are trying to isolate, as I mentioned, cannabinoids and bring them to market, and they have isolated some, but these are single isolates, and most people feel that the single isolates, because there's over 100 different cannabinoids in plant compounds, so the single isolates are not believed to work as well, but it's great that they do work.
Well, that's very, very interesting. So basically, for those who have a diminished capacity, like you said, maybe because of external circumstances such as pollution, chemicals, other influences, then what would you do? You would get some CBD oil, derived hemp oil, and you would ingest it, or what? How do you go about this then? And how much would you have to take? And tell me a little about this.
You bet. Well, so I'm just going to back up and talk a little bit about marijuana, because marijuana has been in the news so much. Pennsylvania just adopted a new policy about marijuana. And we know that it's being used successfully for cancer. Brazil, just yesterday, I think it was, announced a more lenient policy to using marijuana for, oh, not marijuana, CBD oil for cancer and for, I believe, Alzheimer's, several different disease entities. But a lot of people don't want the psychoactivity. So we turn to hemp-derived CBD oil, which has a bunch of different cannabinoids, and it also has terpenes. That terpenes are aromatic compounds. Many of us are familiar with them, although we don't think of the term terpenes. The lemon smell comes from a terpene. The pine smell comes from a pine terpene. And the terpenes actually have healing properties themselves. So the cannabinoids, the terpenes, together with plant sterols, vitamin E, natural occurring vitamin E, they all contribute to the health properties of CBD oil, and you can actually take the CBD oil and ingest it. So what we're finding is that we have a product that you can spray or you can take as a capsule, and there's an oil. And we used to recommend a higher dose of CBD oil, and just recently we're finding out that lower levels now are just as effective as the higher levels. So we actually are recommending now to start low and go slow, because that's how amazing this plant is.
Well, my wife Ginger and I, we actually, after talking with you a couple of months ago, we actually went to your Best Can site, and we purchased 2 syringes of the CBD oil. One is kind of rather like a little bit like a mayonnaise consistency, more or less see-through. It's a little intense in flavor, and the other one is this more solid, almost tar black compound, and I must say we both feel calmer. It's I don't know long term yet exactly, because we've only done it for a few weeks, but we both feel calmer, and my wife sleeps better, which is really quite extraordinary because she's had so many sleep problems for such a long time. So talk to me about these 2 different products. What's the difference between them? I mean, with all what you've just mentioned, how would you best say that one takes this?
The 2 products are from organic fields, but they're processed a little bit different, so their composition is slightly different. One is from the whole plant, and they pretty much do the same thing. It's really a question of finding your own particular comfort level. For people who are dealing with cancer, we had recommended the one with the higher dose, that's the bold, versus the whole plant, but they're both really, really good. And when you look at them, they have such a long list of healing properties. They're in the long run, they're analgesic. That doesn't mean you take it like you would take an aspirin or an ibuprofen, but it does. There's a patent on it that it protects against neuropathy. I mean, an amazing patent where they describe several different forms of neuropathies, and they discuss that it's helpful for them. It's anti-anxiety. It's a powerful antioxidant. It's anti-inflammatory. It's immune supportive. It is a bone support product. I mean, all these women who are running out for pharmaceuticals, when we have a natural health product with research supported information that it protects the bone. It's anti-epileptic. It's antispasmodic for people with MS and other spasmodic conditions. It's anti-ischemic. It's anti-proliferative, meaning it does protect against cancer, anti-nausea, and the one that I really like is that it is brain protective. It is, so for anybody worrying, not that I think anybody should worry about it because that's against the law. I mean, you don't want to worry about anything, law of attraction wise, but people concerned with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, it's so good for protecting against that. So, and there's a patent regarding that as well. A patent by the U.S. government. So it's kind of held on behalf of the people of the United States, 6630507, which says that it is neuroprotective and cardioprotective and immune protective. I mean, wow, that's what I want. Doesn't everybody want that?
Yeah, that's a very, very well-rounded, almost. Everybody always in the sci-fi movies, this one pill that protects against everything. Well, this is not a pill. This is a naturally derived substance. This is totally amazing.
Yeah, we take things out there, Daniel, that are good, like MCT oil or coconut oil. I'm all for coconut oil. I love it. And coconut oil has a lot of protective mechanisms, but it doesn't protect the endocannabinoid system. I mean, that's just huge.
Yeah, that does sound like it's totally huge. So, how come we really haven't heard anything about this? What's the reason behind that? I mean, everybody and their uncle should be advertising this.
That's one of the things that got me really worked up because I agree. We should be hearing about it, and we're not. And why is that? Well, in the 30s, as I mentioned, it was squashed. It was buried. We were prohibited from growing hemp in the United States. And we are actually still relatively unable to grow hemp in the United States. It's mostly delegated to, you have to make an application, research studies, things like that. I mean, this is an amazing crop that we should be growing here in the United States for, as you said, plastics and oil, fuel. Henry Ford wanted to use it as a fuel for cars. So we should be hearing about it, but it isn't even being taught in medical schools. And that leads us to why? Well, the pharmaceutical industry would like to control it. And it doesn't look like they're going to be able to. It looks like they're going to have to share it with us. But that is still evolving. So anybody who gets on board with CBD oil is part of joining not the revolution, but an evolutionary project.
Power of the people, huh?
Power of the people. There's no turning back. For people who want to use marijuana, I don't see there's any turning back on that. And of course, hemp is less controversial than marijuana. It has no THC. It has no psychoactivity. So there should be no turning back for CBD oil. And it is absolutely unconscionable that it's not taught in the medical schools yet, that it's being controlled. But I do believe that conversations like this, Daniel, will open it up to people and raise their awareness and put it back in people's medicine cabinets like it used to be 70, 80 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a very good segue. Talk to us a little bit about the history. And you said 70, 80 years ago. So why did they have it then? What was the... I mean, when you talked to me about the book you recently wrote, and you went as far back as what they did in Chinese medicine 2,500 years ago. So let's talk a little bit about the history and how this all came to be.
Well, actually, it's been used for over 5,000 years. The Assyrians used it, the Egyptians used it, the Ayurvedics used it, as you mentioned, the Chinese used it, the Greeks used it. And there's documentation in famous hieroglyphics and documents about its use. The Greeks used it on their animals in a paste that they would put on the joints of their splendid horses. It was used in Islamic culture for seizures. Jesus used it as an anointing oil. So it's been used throughout the millennia. And then it was brought to Europe, I believe, in the 1600s, where it was widely used for melancholy. And then it was brought to North America in about, I think, 1840 by a doctor who was working in India, and he brought it to North America, and the founding fathers used it for paper, and they grew it, and I'm sure they were well familiar with the healing properties as well. With time, I guess, with industrial development and the DuPonts and the Hearst family, they didn't want it around, so they buried it, and they had very important connections in politics. They were able to banish it, and
well, actually, I mean, wasn't it vilified, and it was told, everybody was told it was evil and whatnot, and then so
evil,
it got a bad
exactly.
rap.
You didn't want to be like those bad black jazz musicians or the Latino field workers. It was vilified unnecessarily. So again, we didn't hear about it, but have been lawsuits over these decades, and certain organizations fought to bring it back. The hemp industry fought to bring it back. In the 40s. So it was banished from the United States, and then World War II came, and we needed hemp for rope and parachutes and military purposes, and the United States actually granted farmers special compensation for growing hemp. But after the war, they outlawed it again. So now it's back. It's mostly imported from Canada and Europe and a few other countries. And, hopefully in the very near future, it will be a really important crop in the United States.
Yeah, I hope so too. I know that one of the Carolinas recently introduced legislation to let farmers grow it again. So the first state it's coming up, and in the state of Washington, if you now that they've legalized the pot trade, they also, for those who have a license, they can also grow hemp.
And it's amazing because we were speaking actually to someone who was talking about how they're looking at the different compounds to isolate more compounds and to make different strains that to customize them for healing.
All right. That sounds totally exciting. Now, let me ask you this. So, are there many other? I mean, you hear about it, so there must be some products out there. So, for the novice who goes out there, what do they need to look at if they're interested in this? What determines whether they're involved with a good product or a mediocre product?
First of all, let me say, because Amazon is huge, that Amazon does not at the present time allow CBD oil to be sold. If it's being sold on Amazon, it's being labeled as hemp oil, and that's totally misinforming the public. So don't look to Amazon. There are companies like the one that I'm involved in, Best Can CBD oil, and you want to look for something that is organically grown. You want to look at something that's non-GMO. You want to make sure that the oils are extracted by the best process, which is CO2 decarboxylation, supercritical CO2 decarboxylation, and that won't, you don't really want to go with a mom and pop organization just yet that are growing their own, because you don't have the certification of the levels of THC usually. You don't have uh, organic certification, and you don't have the decarboxylation certification. Those are all really, really, really important measures that you want to have secure knowledge that you're taking a high quality product.
So for anybody looking, they need to do their research, buyer beware, and they need to ask questions, and they need to make certain that, like you said, it is organic, non-GMO, and then this complicated term that you just used. All right, that sounds all very exciting. Now, what about its legality? I mean, isn't it classified the same way as marijuana? And therefore, I mean, is it legal?
The federal government still classifies it the same as marijuana. However, they have allowed the states to monitor them themselves. And at the present time, it is legal in all the states. You do not need a prescription, as you do in most states with marijuana, if you're allowed a prescription at all. You can travel with it, you can buy it and sell it over the internet without any federal interference. How that's going to change, well, I guess we have to wait for the next election.
Yes, definitely that. But also, didn't the FDA recently just say, no, nobody can sell it anymore?
Not CBD oil, no.
Not the CBD oil.
Not the
Okay.
CBD oil.
I mean, I know that the Obama administration recently said that they weren't going to enforce the pot laws any longer in states where it was quote unquote legal. Yet they still come in California and they still do raids, and they still, so, you know, one hand obviously doesn't know what the other hand does.
Well, the other thing is, Daniel, is that there is a controversy that the pharmaceutical industry, along with the FDA, they do want to take it out of the public domain, CBD oil. It is unlikely that they're going to be able to do that because the momentum and the demand and is there, and it would be much the same, as saying, well, with coconuts, the pharmaceutical company wants to manufacture and market an MCT compound and as a pharmaceutical, and they could very well, if they do it to hemp-derived CBD oil, they could say, well, we're taking coconuts out of the public domain, and so it's an resveratrol or any of the products. So this is a very important line in the sand to defend the public's ability to have such an amazing compound.
Yeah, I mean, nowhere else in the world is the pharmaceutical company able to patent natural organisms, but in the United States, somehow they get away with it. I think it's really bad. But I hope that they won't be able to put patents on it and just close up the market. So there is a little other question that has come up here because for workers who have to prove that they don't do drugs, government workers and stuff like that, and so here comes the doctor or the nurse and says, hey, there's a little cup here, we need a urine sample. If you do CBD oils, what is the likelihood that you will be caught, quote unquote, doing drugs?
We do not recommend that anyone who is requires a urine test take marijuana or CBD oil, or for that matter, any of the pharmaceuticals that now are cannabinoid based. Not only that, Daniel, but I have been told that those individuals should not take any hemp products, not hemp oil, not hemp seeds, until this is all worked out. It is unlikely that they would have a positive test, but if you get a positive test, you're opening up a big can of worms. So at the present time, we say stay clear.
Better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry. It is unlikely that you'll test positive, and there's a basic radioimmunoassay test, and there are more sophisticated tests, but you're putting your livelihood and your profession at stake, and that's just not a good way to go at this particular moment. This will evolve. This is evolving, and I think it's very safe to say that I can't imagine that in the not too distant future it'll be okay.
Okay, so, but aside from that, because there could be a possibility that it would reflect badly with a urine test, but aside from that, CBD oil is totally safe. You can drive, you can lift, you can operate heavy machinery, as they say. It's totally safe.
It's not psychoactive, and it does not work on the brain stem, so you cannot overdose. And the U.S. patent says that I should have it at my fingertips, but many, 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 many times a normal dose is safe. So yes, the only people that have to be concerned is the cannabinoids do affect liver detoxification. So that if you're on a string of pharmaceuticals, because the pharmaceuticals are also detoxified in the liver, if you're on pharmaceuticals, the cannabinoids can slow down or change the rate at which your pharmaceuticals are processed, and that you need to be careful about. That's not the norm. That's for older people, and it's a little bit of a quandary because the cannabinoids are so good for older people: brain protective, sleep protective, mood helping, but it has to be done slowly to make sure that the
So go at it gently. If in doubt, go at it gently.
Absolutely. Go slow, go low, go slow in the elderly.
Okay, that sounds really very exciting. Is there anything else have we covered it all, or is there anything else that you want to add here?
Well, it's such a rapidly growing field. It's good for your metabolism. They're finding it helpful in diabetes. They're finding it helpful for psoriasis and skin conditions. And I think that we're going to be hearing so much more about it. It's just an amazing healing plant. And everybody keep your antenna up because it's awesome.
It's awesome. Well, fantastic. And you're with it on the ground floor. So congratulations. Thank you for allowing me to ask you all these questions. It was very enlightening for me, and I wish you all the best.
Daniel, you're a master. I'm so pleased to have had this opportunity with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Be well. Bye-bye.
Be well.